Hello? Hello? We're going to get started here. My name's George White. I'm the planning director for the city of Pacifica. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and taking part of their weekend and devoting it to this what we think is a very important issue, which is updating our general plan. In a minute here, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Winch, who is with Diet and Bhatia, who is the consultant that has essentially helped us draft this plan. And he's going to kind of go over some of these materials and what we are expecting to achieve, with this meeting and the meeting we had last Wednesday. Before we start, I wanted to mention we do have hard copies of all of the materials over here. I'd love to be able to give one to everybody, but they're so expensive to reproduce, we just can't do it. So you're welcome to look at those. If you're interested, we have discs that have all of the materials on there that we can give to you. The materials are also on our website, and the hard copies are also at the libraries, so you can look at them there as well. We also have some refreshments, some coffee and water and cookies and things like that. Please eat them, because last time they didn't, and our staff had to eat them. So, right. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Peter, and we'll get started. Thanks.
Thanks, George. I appreciate, again, as George said, all of you coming out. The process has been ongoing for some time, and probably some of you have sort of come in and out of being aware of this update going on. I want to sort of give a brief overview of how the process has gone over the last several years, where we are now, and what are the next steps, and then walk through just very briefly sort of what the key ideas are. And then we'll take questions after that. And we have several, both City of Pacifica and Diet and Bhatia staff here. We have name tags, and you can talk to us after that as we mingle and so on. The planning process kicked off in 2009, and we had a series of community workshops. We started with what is the community vision for Pacifica? Actually, before I get into the process, I want to say just very briefly what the general plan, what the project is. The general plan is a state-mandated policy document talking about physical development and resource preservation issues, fundamentally about land use, but also circulation, open space, environmental protection, and other issues. The local coastal land use plan is the other part of this project. And that is very closely related to the general plan. It is essentially a land use plan, but just for the portion of Pacifica west of Highway 1. And this is required by the California Coastal Act. And the purpose of the coastal plan is to show how Pacifica can meet the goals of the California Coastal Act, which have to do with ensuring public access, protection of coastal resources, and encouraging coastal-related activities along the coast. So the two products of this project are the general plan update and the local coastal land use plan update. And these haven't been updated, believe it or not, since the early 1980s. So these are very old policy documents we're talking about. And so it really required taking a fresh look and giving the current residents and stakeholders, business owners and so on in Pacifica an opportunity to think about how you want the community to develop in the coming years. The third product that is related to this is what's called the Environmental Impact Report, the EIR. And this is also required by state law, by CEQA, and it requires the city to study the potential environmental impacts or effects of this action, which is the general plan. So it requires us to study, according to CEQA, the environmental issue areas that CEQA defines, what could be the impacts of the general plan. So I'll briefly talk about that as well. As I started to say, the process started in 2009. We started out looking at coming to the community and seeing what do people want the city to become? What do people envision about Pacifica? What do they think is best about it? What would they like to see change? And moving from there into sort of more specific early draft sort of policies. And we did that in 2009. We brought the results of that process to Planning Commission and City Council in 2010 and had some constructive sort of informational sessions with them at that time. Based on that, we then came back with alternatives, alternative versions of how we could express these community desires, as well as other important factors, we had done a study of existing conditions so that we understood what the environmental conditions were, what the sort of growth prospects were, a full array of issue areas. Bringing all that stuff together, we crafted 3 alternatives, and the alternatives basically differed. There were 3 separate sort of overarching concepts, and then they sort of zeroed in on very specific parts of Pacifica that we identified as potential change areas. And we brought those to the community, and then we brought the community's response to those to the Planning Commission and Council. And then at that time, the Planning Commission and Council actually made recommendations about each of these specific sites that we had looked at. So we came away from that process with specific recommendations from Planning Commission and City Council about how to approach each of these sites that we had identified as potential change areas. And the result of that whole process was this land use plan, which is the first of the presentation boards you see here. I encourage everyone to sort of take a look and to ask questions and so on about it. The fundamental idea, I think, is that Pacifica's sort of open space character was probably the most universally liked and, valued aspect of the city of Pacifica. And so that is really maintained. And in some places there are additional lands are identified for conservation. At the same time, there is somewhat greater development opportunity created in specific locations, primarily along the Highway 1 corridor. So primarily shopping centers, business districts. These parts of Pacifica would gain some degree of mixed use or visitor-oriented commercial, additional opportunities for development. Another thing the plan does is it introduces a greater degree of specificity with what kind of commercial or mixed-use development could occur. So that currently the general plan, it just says commercial or it says mixed use. And this general plan update provides more specific, tailored categories. So we have visitor serving commercial, we have retail commercial, we have mixed use neighborhood and mixed use center. And each of these comes with a set of land uses that would be allowed and building intensities that would be allowed. So that is the essence of the land use element, which is sort of the heart of the general plan. This board also talks a little bit about 2 other elements in the general plan. One is called economic sustainability, and one is called community design. Of course, those are important characteristics of Pacifica, and the plan has policies to, for example, stimulate Pacifica's visitor-oriented, the potential for more tourism-related activity, talks about the potential for more sort of Main Street-related activity, and so on. Community design talks about the character of neighborhoods and centers and maintaining and enhancing the sort of character of Pacifica as you experience it coming through on the highway and so on. The circulation element, this is the subject of the next board, focuses on the roadway system, and I think a real departure from the last general plan is a much stronger focus on multimodal travel, so moving not just by car, but walking, cycling, and transit. So there is a strong focus on those things. There are policies to create what are being called now complete streets, which is actually a state requirement. So new policies for Pacifica to rebuild its streets over time in a way that supports all modes of travel rather than just vehicles. The next board focuses on the open space and community facilities element, and this is where we talk about park standards, both sort of what are the priorities for local neighborhood serving parks, what are the priorities for regional conservation, and how can we create a better, more comprehensive trail system. It also talks about civic facilities and schools and so on. The idea of a new library, of a new civic center. Those are in that element. These last 2 boards talk about actually the other 2 documents that we're here that we're here about. This one being the local coastal land use plan, which is again, the document that is required to meet the California Coastal Act. And the key thing here is that all of the policies that are in the local coastal land use plan are also in the general plan. It's not, the reverse is not true. So the idea is we give to the Coastal Commission the aspect of the parts of Pacifica policymaking that are important to them and not anything more. So that they're able to just evaluate how well Pacifica's planning is meeting the Coastal Act requirements. So this board talks a little bit about how that local coastal land use plan is structured and what the Coastal Act goals are and how Pacifica would meet them. And then finally, the last board talks about the EIR. In a nutshell, we evaluated all of the issue areas that CEQA identifies and that were identified in a scoping session that was undertaken in March of 2012. And the findings were that there would be significant and unavoidable environmental impacts in 2 issue areas based on what the CEQA sort of criteria are. And those would be in terms of transportation, congestion on Highway 1 and Highway 35, and in terms of air quality, vehicle miles traveled increasing faster than population growth. And that's based on the transportation modeling that was done for this plan. So the idea with the EIR is simply to disclose that we identify these as potentially significant and unavoidable impacts. The rest of the issue areas we found to be less than significant. So that is the program in a nutshell. And we are available to take questions and respond to your comments. And so again, so glad you all came.
Review of the plan and commentary can be done online through that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. A couple more things I want to say. Right up here, we have a feedback form. We also have a handout that has it has this board and the land use board. The feedback form gives you opportunities to comment on the plan and on the EIR. And I should say about the EIR, this is actually very important. The EIR has an official comment period. So we are in it right now. It started when the EIR was released in early April, and it extends until July 10th. And so all members of the public are welcome to comment on the EIR, and those comments the City of Pacifica is obligated to respond to in what's called the response to comments document, or the final EIR. Comments on the plan, or the local coastal plan, are not they don't have that sort of legal basis, but the city will take them into consideration and present the character of those comments to Planning Commission and City Council, which would be the next step of this process, to take these plans to the decision makers. So your comments on the plans we will be presenting to Planning Commission and City Council, probably in the fall, we're thinking. So the only deadline we're talking about is for the EIR, and it's July 10th. July 10th. All of the plans, both of the plans and the EIR are available online on the city's website. The web address, I believe, is on this feedback form, and all contact information is on the feedback form as well. There are a limited number, I think, of CDs, so if someone wants to get the plan on a CD, you can take that home with you. And as I said, they're available on the city's website. Yeah. Yes?
First of all, thank you for holding this meeting on Saturday.
Yeah.
Summarizing the board's I think one of the questions I had was, you said back in 2009 there was a survey done to the community.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, how would we summarize? We all have different ideas of what Pacifica is. Most of it, I think, is, I'm guessing, fairly similar.
Mm-hmm.
But as a city, do we have a model? In other words, when you see Daly City as the gateway to the
Mm.
like is Pacifica the playground of Silicon Valley? Is it the
What's our slogan?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's our slogan? Is that really
Yeah.
summarize very specifically what we would focus on in terms of all of the
Yeah, I don't think we have that one-line brand sort of statement, but it is something that we're working on. We have an economic development committee that's the intent of which is to deal with issues of economic development, obviously, but as part of that, we're looking at branding and trying to figure out what that vision statement or what that catchphrase could be. But right now, if you look at the city logo, I think it just says Scenic Pacifica. I mean, that's not really very explanatory. So I think it's a work in progress right now, and it's not typically, I understand, yeah, right, yeah. 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 Well, I think we're open to suggestion. So if you have some ideas, by all means. It's not typically something that comes out of a general plan process, but not saying that it couldn't. Yeah.
I would say that at that first workshop we held, one of the exercises was this sort of, it's a little artificial, but I think it helps stimulate these kind of ideas. It was a magazine cover, and we say, there's a magazine about Pacifica in the year 2035. What accomplishment or what characteristic of Pacifica should it, communicate? And so those headlines were sort of, then people shared those around or whatever. And there was also an exercise at that time of what do you like best about Pacifica and what do you want to see change? You could go back and look at all these reports are online, the reports that we did along the way, and it's interesting. And it did help us, I think, focus on the open space character and the potential for sort of helping Pacifica benefit more from its location and what it has to offer.
I agree. I think it's defined. It'll actually attract the visitors that you need to support your businesses here.
Yeah.
As long as they clean up after themselves.
I also think that Scenic Pacifica is the thing that pretty much everybody I've ever talked to agrees upon. And every other thing I've heard suggested, there are people who don't.
Yes.
Their business benefits from Scenic, and everybody benefits in every way from it being a beautiful place.
The primary reason I was asking is because, I'm a mother of two.
I think it'd be good to go back and look at some of those documents. The introduction of the general plan identifies what we saw as the key themes that came out of that process. Let me get here. So what we identified as the key themes were open space preservation and a trail system, sustainable development practices, creating a destination for tourism, shopping area revitalization and walkable mixed-use areas, a unique vital center for Pacifica, diversity of housing and population, recreation facilities and activities for youth, infrastructure improvements, and protection from natural hazards. Those were our key themes. Yes?
The Calera Parkway is part of the general plan, is that correct?
Well, the Calera Parkway project is a separate project on a separate track. So what the general plan update did was said, well, there's this project which is in the planning stages. And we analyzed the potential transportation impacts both with and without completion of that project. And then the plan contains policies that are more broad, that don't tie the city to that project specifically, but recognize the problem of congestion along Highway 1.
I wanted to speak about the Calera Parkway project because it's my understanding that the city council has already approved it. And without public hearings and without most of the people I speak to, I've lived here in Pacifica. I feel very strongly that this three-way riding park should not take place. It would destroy the very things that you're trying to create. We have new businesses along Highway 1. We have Lovey's Tea Shop. We have the Surf Spot. We have the coastal, small town community that we are. And this freeway will destroy that. And not only will it destroy it, but I'm sorry, I feel so strongly about this, it's hard to speak. We do want to preserve, Scenic Pacifica will not be served by putting up a freeway with 12 football fields long retaining walls around the freeway from 10 to 25 feet high, which will block the views of our beautiful city and also represent a danger that the freeway would be wide to 150 feet. Pedestrians would have to cross 150 feet to get across this freeway. I'm not totally knowledgeable about the issue because I just went to the general meeting about it this week, and I think that the John Keener, who's running for city council, went to 1,100 households and knocked on doors and asked people if they were for or against the freeway, and it was 4 to 1 against of the people that he surveyed. And I think if this is brought, everybody that I've talked to doesn't know what's going on. There haven't been public hearings about the freeway widening and what it will do to our community. And I admire the steps that you've taken to beautify our city and the other thing I think the freeway will destroy is the walkability. Okay? And you're talking about having walkability, access to small businesses. I think that Rockaway Beach has come a long way. We have a lot of new businesses in Rockaway Beach. And when I walk the trail along Pacifica's beach, I meet a lot of tourists who are really enjoying those trails. And some of those trails will be wiped out by this freeway too. These are the things that attract people to Pacifica, our scenic beauty. The other thing is that
Appropriate forum for this discussion?
Well, I think all I can say, and I appreciate your comment, and you're welcome to make those comments, obviously. The way that the Calera Parkway project and the highway generally is handled in the general plan was described by Peter. So the plan itself is not a catalyst for that project. It's just, sort of.
That it was part of the general plan.
Not directly. I mean, again, we recognize that there is a project, as Peter pointed out, in the planning stages, but we can't anticipate necessarily whether that project's going to happen or not. So all we can really do is analyze it in both, conditions, one that has it and one that doesn't.
I'd like to address it is on your board.
I understand that because it is in the planning process, so I said that we do have to acknowledge that. I think the short answer to your original question, which is the council's already approved it, that's not the case. The council hasn't taken an action yet, and it's my understanding that there will be public meetings on this topic later this summer?
Or early fall.
This summer or early fall. Actually, this is our city manager, so she may be able to maybe have a one-on-one, but either way.
Just make a...
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Tinfo. I'm the city manager. I've been here for 8 months, so I'm still getting up to speed on all of the issues, but I am familiar with the Calera Parkway issue. We will be having a community engagement process. I've just now started planning it. We've got the budget adopted. That's been a big issue for the city, and so you'll be hearing some more over the course of the summer and having some meetings probably in the early fall. Some of you might be aware that there is a legal challenge that's pending, and we are waiting until that's been resolved before we actually start holding these meetings, because it didn't seem to make sense if a legal process might change the project to hold meetings on something then that could change. But it is the city's intent to hold a public engagement, a community engagement process, and so stay tuned for more about that in the coming months. Thank you. George, where'd you go?
All right.
Does anyone else have any, we could take a couple more and then return to sort of just an informal, milling around and yes, go ahead.
Question, one of the issues that you pointed out in the DR was basically traffic, TV and air quality, because basically it's cars.
Right.
And have they addressed issues like San Francisco cut back bus service in this city dramatically? The 118 shuttle to Coma was cut back to basically 1 hour during rush hour. I think a total of 6 runs, during the entire day. Was cut about, down to 1/3. And that's just one example. I think they reduced to 14, and it's now the shuttle bus. So it really reduced the service of public transit here. So I was wondering if that been accounted for? This change was done in the beginning of 2014. And secondly, have you accounted for new technologies in vehicles? And we've got Tesla, Nissan coming out with fully electric cars. The battery technology is changing, quite rapidly.
Right.
Computer technology. Google has a self-driving car, which will, make the vehicle more efficient because it takes the human factor out of the driving.
Yeah.
And allows things like training, which increase the vehicle's fuel mileage and increase the efficiency. So has all this stuff been accounted for?
Yeah, I'm actually, it's a good question, and it sort of, I think, gets at the challenges of trying to anticipate and forecast impacts of a land use plan, essentially. What we do is we forecast an amount of development which we think is facilitated and feasible under this land use plan, and then the traffic model, which I myself am not involved with. We have a sub-consultant who focuses on transportation, and that results in that sort of the Pacifica-related transportation then is a drop in the pond of the larger circulation system of San Mateo County and Santa Clara County and so on. All of that traffic movement then gets translated into anticipated traffic volumes on different roadways. Then translating that to air quality requires making assumptions about fuel efficiency, fuel mix, and all of this stuff. And I would say, and I don't remember what those assumptions are, I would say that they're probably very conservative in the sense of they probably don't really account for the kinds of technological changes that we're likely to see in the next 20 years.
They do need to. This is stuff that came out really in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
One cutback in the bus service was this year. And Google's now talking about rolling out the self-driving car in 5 years.
Right.
And obviously it's done this year.
Okay. Well, I think for CEQA, I think that it is appreciated to make conservative assumptions, and not to assume that in 20 years everyone's going to be driving a car that gets 100 miles per gallon. That very well could happen.
Well, it could happen in 10 years.
Yes. Right. I think that the assumptions that were made resulted in a finding of significant impact. That finding actually doesn't affect the plan itself. What the IR says is, this is the impact that we think, that we conservatively project to occur. These are the policies that the plan has to try to mitigate that impact. So there's nothing the city of Pacifica can control about transit service that is run by Samtrans, except that the city of Pacifica will encourage and advocate for more transit service. And the city of Pacifica will create a development pattern that is more easily served by transit by concentrating development in certain areas, key areas along the Highway 1 corridor, for example. So these are, I think, mitigating policies to the larger problem of air pollution.
There's solutions like the city of Emeryville requires each development put into the Emeryville shuttle, Emeryville round shuttle, which is a completely independent system. Because AC Transit, in past history, has not served that city very well. And so the Emeryville shuttle, paid by the developments, shuttle people to the BART station and that sort of thing.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would encourage you to make that a formal comment, to make your concerns, to look at the EIR and to make your concerns formal comments and submit them, and then the City of Pacifica needs to respond to those. Yep. Yes?
Who is the EIR? Who is on the board? What is it?
The EIR is a document. It is the City of Pacifica sponsors the EIR, and it is required to analyze the potential impacts of their action, which is the general plan. So if they're going to undertake this big public action, which is to update the general plan, the city needs to, under state law called CEQA, needs to analyze the potential impacts of it. Yes? Yes?
I'd like to ask a more specific question to land use planning for the city. The first document talks about essentially the planning, the zoning of different things. And I think fundamentally the document becomes the new general plan is the new list of zoning throughout the city. And then zoning is attached to the use such as residential or commercial or whatever. And there are multiple proposed changes in zoning on individual parcels throughout the city that
You're close. I mean, this process itself will not change the zoning, and the zoning is the regulatory mechanism by which this map gets converted to rules for each individual parcel. But zoning would, during the planning period, zoning would be updated to conform with this map.
So if we change the map saying that now in the general plan, this becomes more residential or more parks or more whatever, that then is enacted with actual zoning as a subsequent step.
That's right.
So what I'm looking for is changes in the existing zoning, or existing planning which will become zoning, and why individual changes were made, so we can discuss them and agree or disagree on them.
Well, like I was trying to describe the process that we went through at the alternative stage, which is where we tested where we identified the areas where we thought land use change, there was potential for land use change. And then alternatives were presented to the community and then to the Planning Commission and then to the City Council in sequence. And
You help me with one specific one, which I think is relevant for the whole city. On Gypsy Hill, there is a change, and I can't find in the documents online where the change was proposed. You can tell me why it was proposed and what the intended
sure,
change
so
was,
Gypsy,
which is that Gypsy Hill goes from C1 commercial, where it was intended to have a visitor serving boutique hotel bed and breakfast. One of the precious things that the city needs, which is commercial development, which brings taxes and whatever, but also visitor serving, and is an appropriate location and place. And we went through that process in 1989. And that large parcel has now been changed to a higher density residential than anything in its area for no reason that is apparently. So if you could share.
sure. So at the alternative stage, we identified Gypsy Hill as one of the potential areas of change. And I think our programs, I think we offered 3 alternatives. One was very low density, a mixture of very low density and open space residential. That's what we ended up with. The second was medium or high density residential. And the third was visitor serving commercial, which was like a hotel. And we presented those to the community and to the decision makers, and the decision makers' recommendations was what we ended up with.
So we didn't include the opportunity to keep it where it was, which was not very low density, but residential open space, 1 per 5 acres. The rest of Gypsy Hill is 1 per 5 acres. That was the original designation of the 1980 general plan. In 1989, at the request of the city, as well as the owner, the hotel bed and breakfast concept was adopted. The general plan was made in zoning. So it could conceivably revert back to residential open space, 1 per 5 acres, but instead we proposed 2 upgraded residential for no reason that would benefit the city.
So I appreciate the long memory that you're bringing to that. I think that's valuable. You're right that that wasn't one of the alternatives that we brought forward. And it is something that I think is feedback that the Planning Commission and City Council could hear, and they potentially could, come to a changed position. But the recommendation that they made is what was followed for this general plan. I think people are drifting away and so on. I want to maybe return to the informal session. All of your comments are welcome. Once again, I encourage you to use the feedback form because I think that's the most durable way to make sure that comments are passed along, and it is the formal mechanism for commenting specifically on the EIR. I also encourage everyone to look more closely at the documents and become familiar with some of the policies and so on that interest you. We're available to talk to you about where you might find the policies that interest you most. And again, I'm very, very grateful that all of you came out on Saturday morning. So. Yes.
How are you going to handle the major downzoning of a couple of the parcels?